Welcome to Spirit Travel Part 2. Get ready for some more unique spirit travel examples from the one and only Kuntarkis. So we've spoken about your out of body, your spirit travel, you're manifesting a physical body, which is so cool.
You can do it, Michael.
Yeah, right now. There's two of me. Hang on, there's four
Yeah,
of me.
yeah. Anyone can. Do you remember I told you about the experience I had? And I've been doing so much magic in the spirit world. It's just incredible. I'm loving it because it's teaching me to bring back my natural abilities. And I would love to bring those natural abilities into the human world. But unfortunately, at this time, it's not happening. And yes, the energy fields that surround this planet need to be dissolved. The negativity from all the violence that has occurred, because it's here. And we need to dissolve it within ourselves to cleanse and clean the air of the past. But I think I didn't tell you about, or I might have told you about that one experience I had being leaning up against a tree in Central Park, where they were holding some sort of magic show, and the guy turned around and said to the people sitting down in front, there probably about 400 people, maybe a bit more. And he said, "Is there anybody else that wishes to come up and trial through the magic world?" And I immediately put my hand up as I was leaning on this tree, and he looked over and he saw me. And he said, "Please, sir, would you come up?"
And you knew what was happening physically for you?
I was totally conscious of it, which was really beautiful.
Right, which means that your physical body was asleep in bed and you were physically manifested in Central Park. Physically, yeah, in the reality. Okay, go on.
In that reality. And I literally walked up on that stage. There was the stage looked like it was put together like a timber platform, and everything. It was quite big, and it had like a big white tent behind it. And when he brought me up, he put his hand out and he said, "And your name is?" And I instantly said, "Mystical Man," which was interesting. And he said, "Is that your stage name?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, sir." He said, "You're a magician?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "What type of magic do you do?" I said, "Living energy." And he said to me, "I'm not familiar with that." And I said, "I create everything through thought consciousness with living energy." He goes, "Oh, all right. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen," he speaks through this microphone. He said, "We have a young man here by the name of Mystical Man who claims to be a magician." He said, "Please give him a warm welcome." And they all clapped, which was really nice. They were quite excited. And I said, "Oh, this is beautiful." And he stood back and he sat down on this chair much further back. And he said, "The stage is yours, Mystical Man." The first thing I did, I levitated. I said to them, well, I explained that I'm not the normal type of magician that creates illusion and fantasy. I said, "I'm the one that creates through thought consciousness." Thought consciousness is everything when you put the mind with it through your imagination. And if you truly believe beyond all doubt, then you work with living energy into manifestation by bringing it into solid matter within the physical world. And there were people in the audience just sort of shaking their heads and saying, "What's he talking about?" And I said, "Levitation. How many believe in levitation?" Oh, there were about, say, maybe 24 hands out of the audience. I said, "So, all the rest of you don't believe in it. Yet, if I literally levitated off this stage, let's say 1 meter, and walked on air, would you believe in levitation?" And they all started laughing. I said, "Yeah." They heard the voices out there were saying, "Yeah, we'll believe you then, you psycho." And that's what one of them said, "You psycho." I said, "Okay." So I said 1 meter, and I raised up 1 meter, and the jaws dropped. Everyone just looked and said, "Oh my God, he's levitating." Another man yelled out, "He's got some hook on his back. He's just a trick." So I walked over to him, and he just looked at me. And I bent down and I said, "Feel my back." And he couldn't find anything. He said, "There's no hook." I said, "No, there's no floor under me too." And he put his hands under there and he said, "The bloody bastard's real." That's exactly what he said. The bloody bastard's real. So I walked back. And then I started walking back and forth on the stage. And they just sat there in total wonderment. And then I just lowered myself down. I said, "Do you believe in energy?" And they said, "Well, apparently we do now." There was this voice that said that because I levitated. And I suddenly waved my right hand and put it into my left and spread it out. And this ball of energy, which was like a sphere, I never say that word right.
Sphere.
That's it. And it was about, say, the size of a football. And I spun it around and I let it go right out to the audience. And I said, "Do you like snow?" And it raised up about, say, maybe 20 meters above them, covered all the people. And I flicked my finger, "Let there be snow," because it was a really hot day. And suddenly, all this snow started to fall. And they were biting it and eating it and said, "It's real snow. Oh my God." They saw snow. There you are. Look at it. It's in my book. I was inspired to write it in at that time. Then the guy got up and he walked over to me and he said, "Oh," he said, "you're the real thing." I said, "Yes." I said, "I see you have a problem. You have a really bad headache." And he said to me, "Oh, yeah." He said, "I do." He said, "I've got a real issue." He said, "I think I could have a tumor." I said, "Really?" I said, "Would you like to sit down and let me use you as my volunteer?" He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Remove it." And he goes, "Are you kidding?" I said, "No." He went up and grabbed his chair and he brought his chair over and he sat sideways to the audience. And I got my hand and I touched the back of his head and I rubbed his head back and forth, left to right. It's like creating a doorway. And I brought my hand back and I drew my fingers straight through his skull and I moved it around and I felt this massive lump. And I broke all the little nerve cells that were holding it all together. And I moved it out. And he said, "What are you doing now? Are you going to do anything?" And I brought my hand around to him and I said, "Place your hand out." And he put his right hand out and I put it into his hand. And he found it really, really hard to believe that that came out of his head. And I said, "You see all that stuff in my hand?" I said, "That is your brain gel." And he jumped up out of his chair and he said, "Jesus Christ," he said, "you're so freaky." And that was his words. And he held on to what was in his hand and he felt the back of his head and he said his hair was all wet and that was his brain gel because the fluid that's within the actual sac. And I walked away and disappeared. That's all I remember was walking away and disappearing. And I woke up and I said, "That was cool." Wow.
And you know that you've got a sense that you were on the other side of the physical, real planet. You were really
Yes.
there.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
so cool.
Yeah, I could see the White House in the distance. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Here is another couple of experiences that came very recently and are very unique, and we had to include them just in time into this recording.
Okay. This happened last night. And all I remember was waking up and I looked around and I felt a real eerie feeling. And I got out of bed and I walked to the door, but I didn't open the door. I walked right through it. And I walked around because I had to sleep in this other bed that night because I was feeling really unusual and I didn't want my darling wife to be caught up in my energies being so close together. So I said to her, "I'm going to sleep in the other room." But as I got up and walked through the door and into her room through the door, I saw her laying there and I walked around and I noticed I was like walking in light. I had this whitish, misty light around myself. And as I looked over at her, I bent down and I gave her a kiss. And she actually opened her eyes and she smiled at me. And I said to her, "I love you, darling, but I have to go." And I dissipated out, gone. I was no longer in the bedroom. And when I came to my senses, I was in the middle of the Australian desert in Alice Springs, sitting on this little rock. And as I was looking down and wondering what was going on, I noticed that I had very large feet. And my arms were huge, like muscular arms. And I could see that I was wearing different type of clothes. And suddenly, out of nowhere, this figure appeared in front of me and went to attack me with a sword. I immediately drew my sword, which I didn't even know was there, and sliced the person, or whatever it was, in half. And as I stood there, I looked down at my body and I said, oh my God, I'm actually in my correct form as an Acharon, a warrior. Then, just in that moment, I looked around and I felt the presence of more than one entity. And before I realized it, I felt this pain in my left shoulder up the top, not far from my neck. And I looked over and I could see this long silvery rod going through the top part of my muscle and tearing a hole in my muscle and coming out the other side. And I immediately spun around, and as another arrow came, which was like a stainless steel arrow, I literally chopped it in half, and I came around and removed the head of this attacker. And then I suddenly felt from behind me this piercing feeling, burning feeling of pain coming through my right side under my armpit. It was like it was going through my skin and ricocheting off my ribs. And I literally moved forward so fast and spun around. And there was this one there with this long-bladed sword, not a thick sword, but a long-bladed sword. And we battled. I could hear the clashing of metal. And then I suddenly came down and removed both his legs, spun around and removed his head. As he fell, I turned around looking to see if there were more. And then I noticed in the distance, the far distance, like a set of lights coming at me. And as I moved closer and closer to these lights, it was a four-wheel drive, a grey four-wheel drive. And as it stopped right beside me, this man, just one man, looked up at me and said, "Holy bloody hell, what are you?" And I said, "I am an Acharon. I come from another world. You must leave here now. Your life will be worth nothing if they see you. Please go." And he looked at me, and suddenly, as I turned, I saw all these like spears coming. And I said, "Go now." And I literally moved forward and literally with my long sword hit all these spears and knocked them, just chopped them in half, and they fell to the ground. And then these beings appeared, and there was about 15 of them, roughly, from what I can remember. And they weren't human. And they were very agile and very quick and could do high leaps. But being an Acharon, I could leap higher. And we started to battle. And as we were battling, I noticed my right side was sore, but I ignored it. And suddenly I said quickly, "Force field on now." And my force field came on, just as a sword came down on my left side on the top of my shoulder where my neck was. And it hit very hard. And I spun around and drove my long-bladed sword right through his chest and flung him so high up in the air. And then I fought the other ones without going too deep into it. I fought the other ones, and within moments, I was the only one standing. And as I looked, I could see this utility moving, but not moving fast. And I could put my vision and bring it closer to me. It's like, you know how you can bring something close? Zoom in. I actually zoomed in, and I could see him filming with a camera or with his mobile phone or something. And I yelled out to him, "Go now." and all he did was drive off and disappear in the distance. And as I looked around, there was no one else. And just then, I dissipated, and I was back in my bed, and I woke up, and I just said to myself, my God, that was an unusual experience. I've never had that one before, where I'm in a desert and I'm actually me as an Acharon, because we're about 7 foot tall and we're very large.
Yeah, this is the first time you've literally had an experience as an Acharon body.
Yes.
Wow.
It's very interesting because I've noticed over the last 4 to 5 years, especially since my son has been born, I noticed a lot of different experiences coming in where I'm more physical than not, and I'm doing the most unusual. I'm saving someone, or I'm helping a nation, or I'm doing something different. But I'm not totally in control. So because of my thought consciousness, I allowed it to occur, to happen naturally. And I found that was the easiest way to deal with it, not to fight it.
So have you made sense of it now, why it happened?
Yes, I have actually. Yes. They are actually assassins, hunter assassins. And it's interesting that I use that terminology in my second book about these assassins, hunter assassins. And they're a race of beings who, I think I told you in one of the podcasts, I don't know if you put it up, but I said to you that I spoke to my father about a situation that I was asked to do, and that was to try and infiltrate and wipe out the enemy within this large building that they had taken control of, and they had about 40-something hostages, and they were going to execute them, and they were a very, very aggressive race.
I just want to insert here that Kuntarkis is talking about a planet in need that he went and saved when he was actually incarnated as an Acharon.
And I actually decided to go in, and I went in as an assassin because I was trained very well, and I eliminated the entire whatever amount there were. And what I discovered that one of these people that came in out of the 15 was the brother to the one that I assassinated back on this planet a long way away from Nakaris. And he was given the assignment to hunt me down. And what I discovered, which is really good for me, is that he was the only brother and there was no one else. So I won't have to worry about anyone else actually coming.
Yeah. How fascinating, though, that it happened in the planes and that you were in your original body. It just, how do you make sense of that? Like, they attacked you there.
Well, the reason they must have picked that spot, or the reason I picked that spot, from a thought consciousness to be away from my family. And I realized that something was seriously going to happen. And the only way to keep my family safe was to go into this one spot, which is in a desert, and there's nothing around for miles. And they literally tuned in to my energies, because I must have known from a deeper level of consciousness that that was the night it was going to happen.
When you say from a deeper level of consciousness, also it could have been some of your spirit guides would have known. Am I right?
That is a possibility, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, so you landed in the right spot for it to then happen.
Yes.
Wow.
And what was really interesting, Michael, after that experience, I woke up and I thought about it, and I said, my God, that was really interesting. After I thought about it for a little while, I just went back into a sleep. And it must have been about 5 a.m. And as I went back into a sleep, I was in this place where there was a party going on. and it looked like a celebration of some description, something a little strange, but I felt a little bit out of place. But Michelle was with me and also my little boy. And as we were walking into the place, Michelle took JC off to the right. And I said, "Oh, all right." I said, "I'll catch you after." And as I was walking around, I noticed that I was dressed in some unusual clothes. It looked like a jumpsuit, but it was white with green sides, little green patches in it. And in front of me, I suddenly looked up and I saw this massive spider. It had to be about a meter long and probably, say, 60 centimeters wide, or maybe a little bit bigger, and had very long legs and very hairy legs. And it was sitting on this wall on a sort of a spider web nest. And I said, "Oh, Jesus." And it didn't look real. It looked like it was an imitation. So I gave no other thought to it. As I moved closer to the table where all the drinks were, I was just admiring the different drinks and quite amazing the colours and all that. And suddenly, this person hit me from my right shoulder as he walked past me, and my left shoulder pushed over the table and hit one of the legs of the spider. And I suddenly felt a tremendous pain. And as I looked down on my left shoulder, I saw all these little like hair stingers in my arm, all over my arm, probably about 40 of them. And as I looked at the spider's eyes suddenly opened, and it's like he moved forward and his eyes were on me the entire time. And as time went through the night, I started to feel a little strange. And I said to my wife, Michelle, "Could you possibly pull these out?" And she did try, but she couldn't get them. And I was starting to feel really uncomfortable in my stomach, like there was something wanting to come up, and it was like caught in my throat. And then this guy came up and he says, "I'll get them out." And he grabbed this little cloth and he squeezed and he was pulling them all out of my arm. And that made me feel a lot better. And as he got them all out, I suddenly started to I was going to be sick. And I felt this thing come up in my throat. And Michelle was looking at me and my little son. And what came out of my mouth was all these little stingers, like little shells that were stuck in my arm, were coming out of my mouth in about, say, 2 to 3 centimeters in diameter in this thick sort of fluid. And it was coming out in lumps out of my mouth over and over and over again. And my little boy, I remember this, he said to me, "Oh, yuck, Daddy, what's that? What's that yucky stuff?" I remember that. And it just kept coming out. And then I woke up. That was it. It was very weird experience.
Was that on the same night?
Yes. Yeah, it happened, as I said, when I come back from Alice Springs and I woke up, within, say, probably 10, 15 minutes, I went back into a deep sleep and that occurred.
It makes me think you were pierced by their, Alice Springs, you were pierced by their weapons. I don't know if it's somehow, to me, it feels like the next one was about getting anything that was in your system out.
Out, yep. That's very possible. I actually thought of that, yes.
And this was, how do you explain to me and to others how physical this second experience was? It felt very physical to you. But
it was. It was,
yeah.
Yeah, the reason it was is when this guy hit my right shoulder with his body, he was a bit taller than me. I could feel the hit. And as I moved to the table to catch my balance, my left arm went down on the table as I leant over. And I remember the weight on my arm pushing on the table, and I thought the table was going to give way. But then I felt this massive pain, like 1,000 pins going into your arm at the same time. Yeah, when I pulled back, I saw all these little hairy pins sticking out of my arm, out of my shirt.
So your family being there as well, were they a part of your reality, or do you think they were literally there, or how were they weren't physical as well, or?
I don't think that they were physical. No, Michael, I don't. I believe I was physical because I never actually touched my son's arm or hand or my wife's arm or hand.
It's interesting. So you can have experiences where you're physical, yet you're still in like a dreamscape, like you're still in a reality that is different and disconnected from your real timeline.
Yeah. And the thing about our experiences is that every single human being in their time of sleep are actually projecting out of their body, spiritually or astrally, and they go to their designated levels of understanding. And a lot of that is governed by the thoughts we have throughout the day or the day before. And we actually live out those thought patterns in most cases. Some live through fear, some live through excitement. Like, if you have an experience about flying, well, that's excitement. I had one about 2 weeks ago, and it was so prominent, but I don't fully remember it. But it was so prominent that I was so free in what I was doing. And I remember meeting up with this man, and as he passed me, he was flying, I hit hands. And as our hands hit, I could see the light, and the force of the whack made a tremendous sound. And so I realized, I said, well, there you are. I'm physical. Because that doesn't happen very often in spirit world. That's why I'm trying to get people to understand that we are only limited by the limitations we set upon ourselves through our own belief systems. And that's why belief systems are limited. And it holds us back from progressing as a conscious being.
Belief systems are like logic; they're set in place, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely.
Not room for no room for spontaneity and creativity and such.
That's right. Yeah, I just wanted to share that anyway, Michael.
Yeah, that was exciting. That was cool to hear. I say exciting, but you went through a real ordeal, for real.
Well, when I woke up, the first thing I did, don't you? I looked at my shoulder on the left to see if I had a massive wound where the blade sliced right through the type of arrow that it was, because it had a 5-sided like a pyramid, but 5 sides and high. And when it went through the muscle, it cut right through it and opened it up. And it's the same with the sword that went through my side of my body. It went between my arm and through my skin, hit my ribs and come out again. And I looked to see if I actually had that, but I didn't.
So, Kuntarkis, how did it feel to be a Nakaron again? What was it like to? I know you had a whole lot to happen. There was a whole scene of stuff, but for a while you were really a Nakaron again.
Absolutely fabulous, because I was limitless.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you saw the way that I was doing spins and leaping up in the air so high, and then throw my body towards the ground and slicing through 2 or 3 of those really nasty assassins, you would say, oh my God, what a movie. And the interesting thing is people say, oh, he's just using his imagination. Well, let me say this to you, to the people that listen. How many of you have had the most unusual experiences that you cannot explain? And you'll find, in most cases, they were all real. But we forget. We forget.
Wow. And also this, do you think this guy in the 4-wheel drive got some footage?
Well, he seemed to have. That's what it looked like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
Well, that might be a good time to call it, Kuntarkis. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It'll be a lot, I think, for a lot of people to digest. And what I always say to people is, never knock something until you try it or find the knowledge to understand it. The heart will always give you the truth. The ego will only give you illusion. What you believe is your choice. But open your mind, open your heart to the possibilities that there is more to human existence than what we have been told, because it is us that is living the delusion.
Thank you, Kuntarkis. And this concludes Spirit Travel Part 2. If you'd like to know more about Kuntarkis, simply find his website, which is etcconsciousness.com. If you have a query, a question, or you'd like to hear something on the podcast, simply email kuntarkis@gmail.com. So thanks for listening. My name is Michael Yon, and stay tuned for more.